Today, we are talking about a retirement plan service and deliverables overview. So this is also called the service plan. There's a tool within the RPAG portal where you can build this for your clients. You can customize it. There's a lot of flexibility that's been built into that tool really over the last few years. So we're excited to bring these enhancements to you. Today, we're going to talk about overall, how do you develop the structure for various clients. Again, very, very customizable. You can really build this out to your specific client needs, to your specific practice needs, whatever is going to work the best overall for you. But just want to give you a little bit of insight in terms of how we put things together on our end, what the service looks like, and where the various pieces are that we actually deliver to clients throughout the process. So quickly, what is the value of the service plan? Relatively simple. It's something that has actually a pretty strong impact on client service deliverables, your overall structure with setting up meetings with the clients. So number one, it keeps us all on track, right? It helps set the agenda for any meeting. Whenever I go into a meeting or go to put together the materials, first thing I do is pull up the service plan. It tells me essentially ahead of time, what are we planning to talk about with this client? What is the expectation that was set at the last meeting in terms of what we're going to talk about and address at this meeting? So it really helps me plan out what I'm looking for. It also helps document it throughout the course of the year. So by the time we get to the end of the year, we can look at it and say, oh, look, over the last 6-9 months, we've done X, Y, and Z for you. It also sets expectations. So it tells the clients what's coming up. Clients like to know that we have a plan in place, that it's not just the same old thing that we're bringing to every meeting. We want to show them, hey, this year we're doing these 5 deliverables. Next year, we're going to do another deliverable. So things like the provider analysis, benchmarking, target date fund fit analysis, those are things that you can project to clients out a couple of years in advance. And then finally, it reminds the clients of our value. So it is a list that the clients see every time we get together of what are some of the key things that we deliver. So prior service plan structures that you've seen, they were pretty high level. It really looked like there was only 1 or 2 core services being delivered. But with the newer structure that we'll introduce today, it's much more comprehensive, a little bit more detailed, because as all of us do as advisors, we deliver a lot to our clients. Maybe that's not just beyond the investment review selection. So with that, we'll dive into really what the newer structure looks like. So overall, this is what our existing service plan looks like that I'm using with my clients. It's broken up, color-coded based on some of the different areas that we're delivering to the clients over time. You can see over on the right and left-hand side really what those pieces are. So I'll spend a little bit of time here, and then in the subsequent pages of this presentation, we've got really more details on each of these services, when we talk about the services, what materials we bring to talk about those services, and what they're used for with the clients. So beginning on the left-hand side in the green boxes, annual goal setting and a total retirement review. These are really the high-level strategic conversations. So the idea is, let's take a step back from day-to-day management of the retirement plan, and let's really look at what are your priorities, client? What are you trying to achieve through your benefits offering, through your business, and how do we help you achieve that? So that really comes into the annual goal setting. The total retirement review structure is the idea of there's more to get participants to a successful retirement than just 401k or 403b. So things like non-qualified plans. How do we think about protecting their assets once they get close to retirement? So long-term care insurance, things like that. So really broadening the view, the idea is that we want our clients to see us as more than just retirement advisors. We want them to see us as more consultants to their overall business, and that we're broadening out that conversation a little bit beyond what it historically has been. In the purple, these are the things that we're doing at every meeting. So if I'm meeting with a client quarterly, you'll see quarterly deliverable dates in the second column, but we're always going to talk about the investments, and we're always going to do something that's related to fiduciary education and best practices. I want my clients knowing that I always have those 2 items top of mind, because that's really what they think about when they're looking at us as their advisors. The bottom section on the left-hand side, the annual discussions. So these are things we want to check in on once a year. So things like the committee governance review. Do they have their investment policy statement signed? Do they have the committee charter in place and a resolution from the board appointing the committee members? If not, excellent time to remind them about it, provide them with those samples that we have on the RPAG portal. Participant demographics, once a year, we're going to check in. What are the savings rates for participants? What are the trends that we're seeing in the participant numbers? A lot of this comes from the record keeper reports. Sometimes it can be delivered by the record keeper. Sometimes it can be delivered by you as the advisor. But overall, the idea is that we as a committee are talking about this. So we're going to put it on the service plan as part of the structure. Fee comparisons and fee structure review. We always want our committees to be comfortable with what their fees are, understand what their fees are, who's paying what, and then how does that compare to similarly sized plans out there in the market. So it's not as comprehensive as the provider analysis where it's that live bid RFP, but it's using the plan fees tool to check in. So we always want to be able to say that in any given year, a committee has looked at their fees, benchmarked them to something to determine if they're fair and reasonable. And then finally, on this side, the cash equivalent review. So one of the aspects of the scorecard is that it does not provide a score for cash equivalent, so money market, GICs, or stable value. So in order to make sure we're fulfilling the fiduciary duties, we want to make sure we're checking in on that at least once a year in a more qualitative way. So deliverables there would be fact sheets, something similar, but making sure the committees understand what do they have, how is it protecting their participants, what are the potential risks or limitations of whatever vehicle they're using. Over on the right-hand side, the blue boxes, these are our rotating projects. So every 3 or 4 years, depending on your advisory agreement with the client, we do one of these projects. So provider analysis and share class review, like to bundle those two together if we've got a client on a 3-year cycle. Provider analysis, that's that live bid RFP. We used to call it the B3. Now we're generally calling it the provider analysis. Also a good time to check in on share class review. Do they have the lowest cost share classes, zero revenue sharing, or most efficient if you're rebating back revenue sharing? Whatever the client's philosophy is on that, it's a good opportunity to remind them of that, check in, see if there's potential for changes, if there's changes needed. Plan design analysis has actually been a conversation we're having a lot with clients recently. It's extremely difficult for employers out there to hire and retain employees. So we're getting lots of questions around how competitive is our plan from a plan design perspective. So we're checking in on that formally at least every 3 years with clients. We can look at things like the plan sponsor industry reports, try to identify more efficiencies that we can get for the committee overall. Target date fund fit analysis. This gets back to the idea of what is the right level of risk for your target date series for your QDIA, given your participant demographics. So this is not just a one-time type of thing of make sure we're on the right glide path. Great, we're there, let's leave it alone. We're checking in every 3 years with clients to make sure that their fact set continues to support whatever glide path they're on. In the yellow boxes, we've got really the participant-focused services. So WellSense Financial Wellness, if a client uses this or not, I leave it on the service plan. It's an opportunity as I'm reviewing this in a client meeting to remind them that this is available. We always want them to know the services that are available, even if they're not currently taking advantage of them. Employee meetings would be more of that classic 401k retirement specific type of meeting rather than your broader WellSense Financial Wellness. And then participant helpline. Within RPAG, we do have that service available for participants. They can call in with questions, particularly now when the markets are more volatile. That's a service that's being used more frequently. So always want to remind committees that that is available. If you offer that through your practice, definitely something to include on there as well. Newsletters and memos. This is one that we proactively send out these to all of our clients on a monthly basis. So the newsletter is designed for the fiduciaries. The memo is designed for the participants. So I'll remind them of that in the committee meeting, that there's part of it that's for you in terms of best practices, and there's part of it that you can use to communicate with your employees on an ongoing basis. And then the last one, client advocacy, is arguably the most valuable service that we deliver. So client advocacy is really working to help make sure that things run smoothly in their retirement offering. This is an interesting one. So one of the things that I like to do with client advocacy when I talk about it with committees is actually call out a specific story. So a lot of times we find ourselves in the scenario where we're working with a day-to-day contact, maybe it's a mid-level HR person, and we're working through potential corrections. We're working through things with the record keeper where service is falling behind or something's late or whatever comes up. But those events don't necessarily make it to the level of the committee on a regular basis. So using this moment on the service plan as you're talking about it with a committee to say, oh yeah, client advocacy, here's a good example of last week when we did this with Eric and we worked through this with the record keeper and overall we were able to get where we needed to go. that achieves a couple of different things. So one thing that we get done with that is we're telling the whole committee about some of the services we're doing behind the scenes. Again, arguably, that's probably the most time-consuming part of our service with the clients is what happens behind the scenes, and that may not rise up to the level of the committee. So we're promoting ourselves with this, as well as promoting the actions of some of the employees where maybe their actions wouldn't normally make it up to the executive level as well. So if I can promote what Eric has done in front of the CFO, makes him look good, overall, it's a good outcome across the board. So we'll dive into some of the pieces of this in more detail here, but I want to give you the group an overall high level of how this is structured, how we review it with clients in a meeting. The template for this, as it's noted at the bottom, is already built into the RPAG system. So if you look under My Templates, you'll see it as Expanded Service Plan. It may be in the RPAG templates as Expanded Service Plan. Sometimes it pops up in different spots. So the meeting structure throughout the year. Historically, within our practice, we used to have the FIR meeting, Fiduciary Investment Review, and the FPR meeting, the Fiduciary Plan Review. We changed that. So now we're just having a retirement committee meeting. So for a client where we meet with them quarterly, we will set 3 meetings out of the year for 1 hour, and then 1 meeting in the year will be an hour and a half. So a little bit longer, a little bit more in depth. That's where we're going to hit on some of those annual topics, as well as one of those 3-year rotating projects. The agenda for the 1-hour meeting, kind of very simple, right? So we're going through the markets, we're going through the investments, and then we'll provide any litigation or regulatory updates, and then any fiduciary education. If we've got time on the agenda, we might throw some of those annual pieces in there as well. That annual meeting can get pretty full, particularly if you have the record keeper in the room. So if we can move a couple of those to where we've got some space on other meetings, then we'll take advantage of that as well. The agenda for the longer meeting, the 1.5-hour meeting, that's a lot of times where we will include the record keeper. They'll kind of take them through their demographics reports. We'll talk about the goal setting a lot of times in that one as well. It's a good opportunity when everybody is in the room. We've got a lot of different parties that are able to speak to different things. Really good time for that longer term strategic planning. We'll also do a lot of the fiduciary check-in things. So the 408B2 documents, want to make sure they're always aware of the fees, what they're seeing, what we're charging, as well as what the record keeper charging and the other expenses associated with the plan. And then also the fiduciary education. More formally, we'll use the fiduciary diagnostic. We'll use the fiduciary education modules. It's a little bit more thorough. So it's kind of what used to be that fiduciary plan review if you ever use that structure. Then down at the bottom, we've got the rotating projects. So I mentioned those get spread out over 3 or 4 years. The way that we make that determination here is depending on what's in the investment advisory agreement. So a lot of that gets driven by how often do we do the benchmarking, the record keeper benchmarking. If in the agreement it says 3 years, then we'll do one of these projects every 3 years, and we'll typically bundle the provider analysis with the share class review. If we do it every 4 years, then we can simply break out all 4 of those, 1 per year. So diving in a little bit more depth, we'll make sure this presentation is available for the group. I would say this is an excellent presentation for if you're setting up this structure, how do you think about what you could deliver at each meeting, as well as if you're bringing new members onto your team, how do they think about it? You can make adjustments to it in terms of how you want to address these various items with your clients. So high-level strategic planning conversations, we mentioned the annual goal setting, as well as total retirement review. Typically, I like to do these around the beginning of the year or the end of the year. Right? It's just the time that the committees are really thinking about what's happening in the next year. And so they're kind of in that mode of what are our initiatives? What are we looking to achieve? So the various discussion points, we touched on that a little bit earlier. One of the things that I think is critical in here is the second one for the goal setting is, what do they want from the advisor? What are they looking at from us? What are they looking at to do in the next year? So it's a good opportunity also to just get feedback. So do they like the services we're delivering? Are the meetings impactful for them? Things like, how much time do we spend on the market review? Is that in line with their expectations or what they want to do? There's a few different pieces for materials. A lot of this is really just free-form conversation is how I've been having it. We do have an annual goal setting template available, which really talks about the components that they have in place for recruiting, retaining, and how they help participants retire. So that could be a good template for you to use as well. For the total retirement review, there is a presentation that was built out that really goes into a lot of the different stages of retirement for how participants can fall into those various elements and how plan sponsor as well as the advisor can help them along that way. The core deliverables at every meeting, I'll spend a ton of time in here. The fiduciary investment review is probably what everyone is most familiar with. This is where you're showing the scorecard, you're going through the market. I tend to have a lot of investment conversations at these. So if we're talking about efficient menu design, the idea of how many funds do we have in the plan, those type of topics really fit in well, and there are materials available for all of those. The fiduciary and education and best practices service deliverable, this could really be anything. There's a lot of ways that you can check this box, so to speak. So there's the quarterly updates on what's happening with Secure Act 2.0. You talk about regulation, you can talk about litigation, anything that's out there that really is a fiduciary focused conversation really helps to achieve this. If you've got time in the agenda, a lot of times I'll throw in a fiduciary fitness education module. It's a good opportunity to remind clients of those things through those in just a couple of minutes, a lot of times. And it takes one thing off that agenda from your annual meeting where it might already be pretty full. The annual projects, so we mentioned these, talked about the service plan earlier. Generally, I will do these at that 1.5 hour meeting. So plan governance review, really just want to check in, make sure that we've got all the documents in place. Anything is missing from the client, then what I'll do is I'll provide them a sample. So on the RPAG portal, we have a lot of sample documents. So sample investment policy statements, sample board resolutions to appoint committee members, sample committee charters, anything that you could want to provide to the committee, you could provide a sample. And then as a follow-up after the meeting, I'll provide them with something that's a little bit more actionable. So that'd be a takeaway action item from our meeting, is to get those implemented in place. Participant demographics, again, this is one that usually I kick it to the record keeper. So if they're attending the meeting, then they can talk through their presentation and we show it as delivered on the service plan. If the record keeper is not available, or for whatever reason they're not attending the meeting, then I'm comfortable going through their reports as well. We'll go through and talk through what are their participation rates, what are their savings rates, what are loans. Really easy, I think, from the advisor side to go through those documents as well. Also, an option is within the RPAG portal, you can upload this type of information so it actually gets branded from you, from RPAG, rather than using the record keeper presentations if that's preferred. The fee structure review. So this is really where we dive into the level of fees for participants. Who's paying what? Is it revenue sharing? Is it levelized fee structure? A lot of different things that come up in there. Always compare this with the fee comparison. So that fee comparison really is using that plan fees report. Historically, we would use the 401k book of averages, but now we've got better data internally through the plan fee structure. So that's what we've been using with clients. The one thing that I will note is any year that we actually do the provider analysis, so that more in-depth benchmarking, I will count these as being done at that time as well. Essentially, it's the same thing. We're just doing it in much more depth. The other component is making sure that we're providing the 408B2s. So committees are responsible for getting 408B2s. If you're paid from the plan as the advisor, it's important that you're providing that to them as well. So if you're providing additional services that have additional 408B2s with them, I'll also roll those in. So for example, if a client is a WellSense client, we'll also include the 408B2 for the WellSense services as well. The cash equivalent review, I mentioned that one as well earlier. This is just a separate fact sheet, usually is what I'll put into the presentations. Right after the scorecard, just get a quick look at what is the structure of their cash equivalent option. So it's a good opportunity for education, particularly if they're in something like a stable value. So we can talk them through the structure of stable value. We can talk through them of what does the underlying portfolio look like? What do the wrap providers look like? How does this compare relative to the universe of cash equivalents that are out there? It's pretty quick from a materials perspective. Just throw it right into the report. You can talk through it. I'll always remind clients of the liquidity restrictions around them. This is one thing that always just seems to come up whenever there's a record keeper change is, oh yeah, there's a 12-month put. It seems to be a shock to committees that there was a 12-month put. So I want to make sure that they're always aware of, hey, this is the catch, if you will, associated with something like a stable value. I'll talk through MVA type of rules that we might see in a GIC. Talk through what types of dynamics can drive differences in returns for money market versus stable value versus a GIC, which right now is actually getting really interesting. Whereas 9 months ago, it really was not the case because money markets had no yield. So good opportunity to remind clients there, show them an additional layer of due diligence that they've not really seen beyond what's on the scorecard, or they've not really seen on the scorecard from us. The rotating projects, so provider analysis, I think everyone's probably pretty comfortable with what that is. That is the live bid benchmarking of the record keeper. So we'll deliver that as a separate report from our typical committee member or committee report that we're providing. This is a big one. It's really, really impactful for clients. We want it to have the feel that it's getting the credit that it's due, and the output of it a lot of times resulting in a fee reduction for the plan, which is fantastic. Share class review. This is where I'll kind of revisit with clients what their expectations are for how they're paying for fees. So some committees have the philosophy of, we want to have zero revenue sharing share classes across the board wherever possible. Some take the approach of, hey, we want to have the ones where it's the most efficient share class, meaning that it's the lowest net investment cost after we rebate back revenue sharing. I want committees to know and understand that they have a philosophy, they've put that in place, particularly if they're using the efficient share class approach. One reason is that if you look at 5500s, it's easy to see, oh, there might be an R5 share class when there's an R6 available. So for another advisor coming in, it's a quick, easy little point that they can throw at them. I want the committee member to say, yeah, we're using R5 because it's more efficient, and that's the philosophy that we've adopted with our plan. So it's important to remind them of what they're doing, why they're doing it, and then check in. So it may be an opportunity where they say, hey, really, we don't like this. We want to go to pure zero revenue sharing. Simpler, let's use that approach instead. So that's the conversation we're having with a lot of clients more recently. For larger clients, we'll actually take this a step further, and I will reach out to the asset managers and say, hey, I've got a client and they have $40 million in your fund. This is the share class they're using. Do you have a lower cost option available, maybe a collective investment trust available that they can access? I want to have this documentation for those larger clients to show that we are exploring everything that's out there, asking for waivers. If the asset manager says, yeah, we've got something available, you have to have 50 million. So can we get a waiver on that? We've got this all documented per some litigation that had come up in recent years. So again, we don't do that for every client, really just some of those larger clients that could be potential targets of litigation given their size. Plan design analysis, we mentioned that we do spend some time using this one quite a bit more recently. I always describe this to clients as, we're going to talk plan design whenever you want to, right? These are conversations that come up on a really ad hoc basis, but I want to make sure that at least every 3 or 4 years, we're sitting down and having a very deliberate conversation about your plan design. So how does it compare to competitors? What can they do from a best practices perspective? How can they actually make the administration of it more efficient? So a lot of times I'll reach out to the record keeper ahead of time and say, are there outsourcing services that this client is not using from you that they could? How do we make things just run more smoothly with the plan? So it's not necessarily a plan design structure, it's more of a plan administration conversation. But overall, that's been really, really effective. Sometimes I'll actually bring the adoption agreement into the meeting. A lot of times, some committee members have seen the adoption agreement, not everybody has. So it's interesting a lot of times to see them go through that document for the first time and say, oh, I didn't know that we could do this on a pay period basis instead of quarterly. Why don't we just go ahead and do that? So it's also a good opportunity for you to bring more of those recommendations to them. What are you seeing in the industry? It's a good opportunity to flex your muscle a little bit as the expert in what's happening in the retirement space overall. I do have that note in here on the right-hand side of scheduled early for safe harbor plans. Record keepers all have their restriction in terms of when you can make changes before the next plan year. So understanding the dynamics of that given a specific plan is very, very important. Target date fund fit analysis. There is an excellent tool on the portal. It's very, very quick to run this. I would say if you're doing this for the first time with a client, you might want to get a little bit more detailed. You can really go through some depth in terms of what are their participant savings rates looking like, provide some real specific numbers. This pairs really well with the plan demographics conversation. So if the year is up where we're going to do a target date fund fit analysis, I'll typically align that with the meeting where the record keeper is. That way we're not kind of double dipping on the participant demographic information. So the record keeper might go through it and say your average savings rate is 3.5%, and you've got 95% participation in the plan. There's a whole bunch of terminated employees. I can then take that information in that discussion and lead it into the target date fund risk fit analysis as we say, here's how we identify your most appropriate glide path, given what we just heard from the record keeper. Again, the tool in the RPAG portal is very, very strong. It's quick. You get a very robust presentation that comes out of it. really by answering 9 simple questions around a plan sponsor. So that's nice. The other concept that we are having a lot of conversations around here is FlexPath. So obviously the idea of having multiple glide paths, what that can mean for participants, what it can mean for plan sponsors. It's an excellent opportunity to talk about that. We have found that if you're going into that FlexPath conversation, a lot of times it takes 2 meetings. So you might have the initial meeting talking about what is the importance of the conversation, what is the importance of the analysis, taking them through the initial analysis to identify the right level of risk in the glide path. And then the follow-up meeting is what are the options that meet that criteria, including a customized target date series like FlexPath that might be available for participants. Participant resources. Again, I think we're all relatively familiar with this, the WellSense Financial Wellness Program, which is available. One piece that you will see on here that we did not have on that initial service plan is the WellSense Employer Report. So if a client engages us for WellSense, then I will adjust the service plan to actually show that 1 meeting per year, we're going to bring the employer report to you and discuss what your participants are saying. This is an extremely powerful report. Committees and organizations love to understand what are their participants saying, what's important to their employees, what are they struggling with, how do they understand the benefits offering. So we'll see things like there's a question there of do you have access to an HSA? A lot of times we see half the participants or half the survey respondents say, we don't have an HSA. And then the other half say, yes, I have an HSA and I max out on it. So it provides some insight for committees as they're looking at it to say, do our participants understand what we're spending money on for a benefits offering and where are some areas where we may need to focus going forward. So I'll add that specifically to the service plan, make sure that we're checking in on that and remind the committees that we're coming in with that information once a year to bring that for them. The employee meeting, this is their kind of classic 401k meeting. There are a lot of clients that still want to have that very focused type of conversation and maybe not engage for the financial wellness additional services. We'll have those on there. If I typically use the upon request, unless a client is very specific about every November, we want to have someone on site. Every April, we want to have someone on site. Really just providing it so that it's useful for them rather than saying, hey, we're going to do this every single quarter as available. Participant helpline, I noted we do have that service here available for our clients. If you have something similar available for your clients, I again remind the committees that this is available. I encourage them to promote it to their participants as part of the overall service offering that's out there. We always get the question from committees of how many people from our organization have called in. So if you're able to provide some commentary back to them, hey, we had 10 people call in the last month. Here's the top 5 questions they were asking. Again, back to the idea of employers like to know what their employees are saying, what they're thinking, and what they want to, what's on their minds more recently. Finally, the other items in monthly newsletters and memos, definitely promote that. One thing that I always reference is to ask the committee if everybody is getting this. So if they're not, sometimes it gets caught in spam or, for whatever reason is, but these are ongoing touch points for us. So we can get it to the committee. If we get something in front of all committee members every month, it's just one thing that shows, hey, NFP or RPAG, we're here to help. And we want to make sure that your needs are being met and we're able to communicate with your participants. Client advocacy, I already spent a fair bit of time on that one earlier, so I won't spend too much time here. But again, reminding committees of all that we do. I encourage them to reach out to me. So that's another point that I always make when talking about client advocacy. A lot of times I don't know if it's an issue unless you tell me. I want clients coming to me first before they engage outside counsel, before they start really trying to solve something on their own and find out that it takes a whole bunch of time or they're heading down the wrong direction. Come to me first, let me help you solve that problem initially. So that's it on our service plan. As I mentioned, this is totally customizable. So you can build the service plan the way that you want to build it. You can deliver the services that you want to deliver. There's so many resources available in the RPAG portal that you can really customize this to what the client needs and what the client wants.